BBC News with Fiona MacDonald. The US Justice Department has released 3 million more pages of documents and photos and videos related to the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. President Trump's name appears again in the files. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum has warned that US tariffs on countries helping Cuba could trigger a humanitarian crisis there. Her comments come a day after President Trump threatened to levy additional tariffs on countries selling oil to Cuba, which is experiencing its worst economic crisis in decades. Venezuela's acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, has said her government will introduce a general amnesty law designed to benefit hundreds of political prisoners. She said the draft bill will be sent to the National Assembly next week. It proposes closing a notorious prison and converting it into a sports centre. More than 200 people are reported to have been killed in a collapse at an open-cast mine on Wednesday in eastern Congo. A spokesperson for the rebel-appointed governor of North Kivu province said the victims included minors, children and women. The head of the United Nations says it's at risk of imminent financial collapse due to unpaid fees and budget rules that force it to return unspent cash it might never have had. In a letter to UN ambassadors, Antonio Guterres said the delivery of UN programs was being threatened. Thousands of protesters have gathered in Minneapolis in the United States to demand the withdrawal of federal immigration agents. Police fired tear gas at crowds in Government Plaza and outside the building where immigrants have been detained. And the US Senate has passed a compromise deal intended to prevent a partial shutdown of the government. It comes after Democrats, supported by some Republicans, blocked earlier attempts to pass funding bills because of anger at the handling of the immigration crackdown. BBC News.
This is Unexpected Elements from the BBC World Service. This is the science show that takes its inspiration from a news headline. And flicking through those headlines is a crack team of science journalists who join me in the studio. We have
Candice Bailey in Johannesburg.
And
Ogechi Ekenyo in Lagos, Nigeria.
And I'm Marnie Chesterton in Cardiff in the UK. Every so often, one of us comes across a local story that deserves a wider audience, and we make space for it here on our Unexpected Elements version of Show and Tell. So, let's start with a show in audio form, of course. Okay, that sounds like a comedy cartoon sound effect, but it is in fact reality. Candice, I believe this is your story. What have we just listened to?
Well, Marnie, that's actually the Rocos Calling song of a number of male bladder grasshoppers who are trying to connect with female grasshoppers. And it's being recorded in Durban, in South Africa. Now, this sound comes specifically from a species called Pneumora inanus, but it's not actually the grasshopper that I want to talk about today.
Okay, what do you want to talk about? And extra points if you can relate it to the theme of connections and isolation.
I'm going to try my best. So, the grasshopper that I do want to talk about is the granulate bladder grasshopper, or it's better known as, its scientific name is Prostalia granulate. And now it's in the same family as the Pneumora inanus, but we don't have any recordings easily available from this grasshopper because it's been missing for 45 years. Until recently, when scientists in South Africa rediscovered it. So how's that for distant connections or distant reconnections?
I like it. I like it. I will take it. So, I love it. Something that, we thought had gone extinct and it reappeared? Tell me more.
Exactly. So it's called a granulate grasshopper because it has several tiny bumps on its body. In fact, the male grasshopper has an inflated abdomen, which serves as a resonating chamber when it makes a mating call over a long distance.
Okay, so it's good to know that inflated abdomens are sometimes, advantageous to finding a mate.
Exactly. So you might be in luck, Money. No offense, no offense.
Well, taken.
The species was known from only three vague historical localities in South Africa. So in Mpumalanga, which is sort of a farm area, the KZN Midlands, and the Eastern Cape, which is on the east coast. But this grasshopper's reappearance really confirms that it still exists extant, and it helps us expand its knowledge on its current distribution, so it actually can be found. You know, what the discovery really highlights for us is why it's so important for it to be in a protected area and in a small reserve of its kind. So, you know, it's really safeguarding biodiversity. There are lots of very poorly known invertebrates that are often overlooked in conservation planning, and this is obviously a good example of that.
Right. So everyone's looking at the charismatic megafauna, and they get all of the attention. People look at the nice big animals and they miss the smaller stuff.
And the cute grasshopper gets ignored, you know, but it's even worse for plants, you know, they always get overlooked, you know. But where this grasshopper was found is in the Mtambuna Nature Reserve, which is in KwaZulu-Natal on the east coast. And this nature reserve is actually recognized for conserving rare vegetation types, specifically endangered coastal grasslands, as well as several threatened plant species. Now, the finding of the granular bladder grasshopper has really prompted scientists to do something really cool, which is compile a new checklist of endemic and threatened invertebrates in the reserve, which really highlights this broader conservational value of, you know, making sure that these plant life and matter actually, you know, can be protected. So the researchers have found that ongoing threats like illegal grazing, fire misuse, pesticides, drift from nearby orchards, underfunding, all of these pose risks to the grasshoppers in habitat and its other species.
Are there any other examples of people rediscovering species?
In fact, Ogechi, there are. It's actually more common than I thought. In fact, when something is thought to be extinct and found or rediscovered, it actually has a name. It's called a Lazarus species. Now, I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with the Bible. Lazarus was a figure in the Bible who was brought back to life by Jesus. Now, another example of a Lazarus species, like the granulate bladder grasshopper, is a species called the Victorian grassland earless dragon. Sure, that's a long name. But the long story short is that in 2023, after more than 50 years of not being sighted, small populations of this Victorian grassland earless dragon was discovered west of Melbourne and its surrounding grasslands. Now, Moni, you've just been in Australia. Have you seen any of these Victorian grassland earless dragons, these lizards?
I mean, I was looking at the area to the west of Melbourne, but primarily because it was on fire as I was passing through. I did stay away from the fire. I did see some lovely lizards in Taronga Zoo in Sydney. I'm just looking at pictures of your Victorian grassland earless dragon. It's very
cool.
sweet looking. Yeah.